You see a demo where somebody's like pulling a turkey out of the oven that's fully baked and you're like, okay, but what happened there? Like there's a lot that you didn't show me between this idea and this working app. It's 2026 and I am so excited. We're kicking this year off with an absolute banger of an episode. One of my favorite people in the community, one of my close friends, a brilliant engineer, a great educator. We are welcoming to the stage the one and only Cassidy Williams. How you doing?
Hello. We're friends?
Oh, no. Did I get that wrong?
I mean, we can talk about this later.
Oh, it's awkward. Okay. Well, okay. So we're already learning stuff today here on the old Web Dev podcast. So, Cassidy, other than your choice in friends, for people who don't know who you are and what you do you maybe want to give us just a quick overview of who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Cassidy. I work at GitHub on the developer advocacy team. I like JavaScript. I write a weekly newsletter. What do I do, Jason?
This is legitimately a struggle that I have is like, I do a lot of stuff, but nothing that I would say is like the thing that I do.
Right. It's probably like we're multi-hyphenates here. And so like...
Multi-hyphenate is such a funny way to put it. I've gone with aggressive generalist.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Chronically doing things.
Which is a nice way of saying a complete lack of ability to focus on one thing for long periods of time. You can turn anything into a strength with the right choice of words.
I was going to say, you just angle it enough to be able to maintain employment and rent money and you're good.
Exactly. So, I mean, you and I have been friends for, well, I thought we were friends for years at this point.
Let's say it for the podcast. We're friends.
We first started working together, I think back in 2018, 2019, somewhere around there.
It was 2020 because it was right at the start of the pandemic.
What, is that when you joined up?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yes. Okay. I guess I'd just been, on the one-sided part of the watching you on the internet kind of friendship.
Oh,
we followed each other's work. We've had a chance to work together on all sorts of weird stuff. We've been cursed by birds together at conferences.
Yes.
We've been able to co-MC things at the Figma config. That was an absolute blast. And we've had a chance to build some really silly stuff. We've both since moved on. And so today you are working at GitHub. So do you want to talk just a little bit about what's going on over there?
Yeah, all the open source things and AI and all that jazz. People talk about that. My team specifically works, I want to say, for open source developers. We want to make open source developers happy. And so we make content for people to be able to contribute to open source more. We build tools, demos, content things for open source developers. And we want developers to love what they do. That's kind of what I love about our specific group within GitHub. I think GitHub in general, we want people to build awesome things and build together. But our team specifically, we love open source. And that's been really, really fun because we get to do streams like this. And we have streams on Thursdays called Rubber Duck Thursdays, little plug, where we just build stuff. And we do talk about GitHub Copilot, but we also have series on how to make good pull requests and issues. And we try to write a lot of technical content and beginner level content all the way through advanced. It's a lot of things to keep open source devs happy, and that's been really fun.
Today, we are going to be talking about that AI stuff. And specifically, you just had a big release. I'm kind of coming at this as somebody who has been pretty resistant in general to adopting AI workflows. And I am fully ready to admit that it's probably a skill issue. But my experience so far is whenever I pick up an AI tool, I pick up, Claude or GPT or any of these things, and I try to build something using it, doesn't do what I want. I've sort of hit this very weird onboarding hurdle where I can't deny how impressive it is to see what people are doing by building these kind of AI agents and workflows. And also, I do not understand where the delta is between what I'm trying to do and what they're doing, because nobody's really talking about how they got good at it. They're just sort of saying look at my fleet of agents. And I'm like, what do you mean?
There's so many terms where it's what is an agent? There's so many AI terms that have been changed and morphed over time too.
Exactly. And so I'm certainly coming at this from the standpoint of somebody who doesn't really have, like, I'm not immersed in this AI shift.
Right.
I am aware of it. I have used some of the tools. At first I was kind of thinking like, I don't know, I'm going to wait it out and see if it sticks. Well, it kind of looks like that's no longer an option. I do think that no matter what form it takes, even if the bubble fully bursts and all these companies go away, like there's open source models, you can run them locally now. Like it's here, we're doing it. It might not look the way that it does now, but like there's some form of this that sticks with us forever. So now I'm kind of starting to approach this from the standpoint of, let's start to understand what it actually does. Like cut through the hype, cut through the sort of like marketing, like the increasingly panicked overtones from executives saying like, oh my God, we get $1 trillion for this. We need to make money, and start looking at it from the standpoint of like, what does it actually do? How does it actually help? And I feel like you and your team are right in the thick of this. There's been a shift that I have not been anywhere near, which is this idea of like moving everything into the terminal. So we're out of the chat windows, we're into the terminal. Things like Claude Code came out and everybody sort of freaked out about it. You've now got an entrant into this space where you just launched the Copilot CLI to help maybe me and anybody else who feels like we're just not as plugged in on this. Can you talk a little bit about like why a CLI? Like why go back into the terminal for this stuff, and sort of what are the advantages of going this way?
So first of all, I get it, because I think a lot of our team, even though we use a lot of AI, we are also skeptics. And I feel like that's been a very healthy balance. I don't think nothing is black and white. People might say like, yay, AI, or no, I'm never touching it. I am anti-AI. I get it. Grand majority, the silent majority on this is it's much more gray and people figuring things out and deciding what they want to do. I think for us, I say us as in like my team at GitHub, a lot of people at GitHub and me in particular, AI has been an accelerator for the things that we are already doing. And depending on how you work and the things that you do, it can accelerate different parts of your workflow. And so that's more how we think of it, as it's another tool. I think my like current prediction that I'm really hoping is true is that the companies are not going to be shoving AI down people's throats as much anymore, because the good tools will naturally rise to the top and be like, this one actually makes sense for my workflows. These ones I just don't need. And so it doesn't need to be like pushed anymore and shoved that way. And so the CLI and then the SDKs, because I think the SDKs are actually more interesting than the CLI, but it's all similar, is another surface for you to work in. It's kind of like there's a lot of people who really like to build with Vim still, or Emacs or something, rather than in their IDEs. It's another surface to interact with the Copilot engines. And that same engine is now in the SDKs, where we have a Copilot SDK for Node and TypeScript, Go, Python, and .NET. And I know there's some like community ones too, in like Rust and C++ and Java and stuff. That is adding the power of Copilot to workflows elsewhere. Okay. And so it's really just figuring out, where do you want the GitHub Copilot stuff to live? And so in the CLI, when you run the CLI, and I see you have a question, so I'll go quick. In the CLI, when you run Copilot, you have a little chat, and you could enter plan mode and say, I want to build this project, start running an agent, or I want you to do something locally on my machine, and then I'm going to delegate it to the cloud, or I'm going to pick these models. You can do all of that stuff in your terminal. But if you don't want to live in the terminal, that's where the SDK comes in. And an example app that I made last week that was very fun to play with was, I made just a really, really cute Electron app with like pixel art and pink stuff everywhere, where I could run agents and make it like do tasks and make PRs in my repos. And it used the SDK and TypeScript and stuff. So I don't have to live in the CLI. I don't have to live in my IDE. I just click cute buttons. And that's what the SDK was able to enable there. Okay.
Talking about the CLI first, and then I want to talk about the SDK after. The idea behind the CLI then, you mentioned that people like to work in their terminals, Vim and Emacs and so on. So is that sort of a similar analogy, where I've historically kind of considered people who get into Vim and Emacs to be more of like the power user types? Like they like macros, they like shortcuts, they like, they're really into like configuring and kind of tinkering to build their setup exactly the way they want it. Would you say that these terminal-based coding like AI tools are sort of a similar paradigm, like they're built for power users in the same way that Vim and Emacs are, or is it something different?
I think yes and no. It's where you can do just a lot of nice commands without touching stuff outside of your terminal in the CLI. And so there's a lot of like power tools and stuff in there. But also something that is interesting, because people run agents, run tasks, run prompts, and just say, I want this to happen, I want this to happen, yada, 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 in this terminal. This is a lot of people who aren't actually looking at the code sometimes too, where they're just like, these are the things that I want to do. They're vibe coding, as the kids saying all these things. And then they go to the editor later when they're context switching. It's really just like, which context do you prefer to work in? And so sometimes power users, but a lot of times it's just like, okay, I know I need to implement dark mode. I'm just going to run it in the CLI because I'm already doing a git commit and stuff in here. Okay. Implement dark mode for me. Then I'm going to go to my editor later and actually review the code in there. It's another surface, and giving the developers the choice to have that surface of the CLI to work on.
Got it. So it's not a full-blown IDE,
right?
But it does more than a chatbot window did.
Yeah.
But it's sort of still a chatbot.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's sort of a bridge then between like,
right.
If the chatbots were way too limited and everything had to be custom built to make the chatbot run, the CLI sort of already has all these hooks where, we know how to make different things happen in the terminal, and you don't necessarily need those to be built super custom. And it's kind of fine if everybody just copies each other because they're shell scripts. Like, who cares?
It's build where you want. And so what's nice too is like there's slash commands. And so, for example, let's just say you have like a really good chat session going in the CLI. Mm-hmm. If you do want to share it out, there's a slash command for sharing it out. It saves your CLI session to a gist, and then you can copy the link to that gist and share it. Again, I mentioned delegating. There's picking different models. There's actually so many slash commands, I can't even name all of them, but it's just directly hooked up to GitHub. You can add MCP servers too in the command line right there and say like, okay, I want to start this task. I want to use the Playwright MCP server to take screenshots of the before and after of this task. I wanted to create a PR on GitHub so I can review that. I want a coding agent to review the PR. Like, you can basically run just a ton of different tasks, skills, models, servers, yada, 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 from one place if you want to.
I will admit that this is like we've approached a layer of jargon where I kind of only sort of understand what's happening now. So it seems like MCP is sort of like building an API for agents.
Right. It's a glorified API library, but for in AI terms.
And then agents is the idea that you're sort of telling the model like, okay, you are this sort of thing, you have access to these things, you do these things, so that you're sort of building out this idea of like, you are a single task agent that can go and perform tasks within this range of skills. Models, I get, the ChatGPT 4.0, 4.5, 5, whatever. Skills, I don't get. It's different than agents. It's different than MCP. But how?
Honestly, it's just scripts. It's just more things that you can do, tasks that you can do, reusable tasks. I feel like that's the easiest way to describe that.
And are these written in code? Are these prompts? Are they MCP servers?
All of the above. Yeah, it's kind of all of the above. The methods is a good way to put it. Yeah, you could say like, hey, this skill is, let's just say there's explain it to me skill. This skill is like, when you explain this code, I want you to always hit these points where you draw a diagram with ASCII art and you show certain code snippets that are relevant, and you give me like a TLDR at the top. Like it's like a very specific task that things can do.
If we think of it as the same way that when we first started with programming, we had, assembly code. And then as we learned more, we started to build different types of abstractions. And that led to, we have whole categories of like DevOps versus front end stuff versus, all the different things that are all ultimately still probably at the end of the day ending up as assembly code somewhere. This is kind of a similar expansion where at first the models are they're language-based inputs, and you're trying to figure out, how do I explain to this model in a way? It's almost like if you find the magic lamp and you get the genie and you got to word your wish in exactly the right way to make sure that there's no loopholes and that you don't get the the downsides, right? I feel like that's sort of where I've landed with a lot of the LLM stuff I've done, is that I feel like I'm like, hey, can you do this thing? And it's like, I did that thing. And I'm like, ooh, not like that though.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, okay, let me add another sentence here in this prompt. Let me add more to this prompt. And before you know it, you're
eventually you're programming.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Kelsey Hightower had this joke. He's like, I found this way to get the computer to do exactly what I want every time, single prompt, very predictable. And it was a bash script.
Yeah.
It's like,
I feel like we are eventually going to be circling back to coding, but just at a different layer. And it's kind of like I kind of think of the metaphor of like, we went from like punch cards to actually typing things into the machine to compiling the code that we typed into the machine, and so on and so on and so on. It's another layer of compilation. Only it's compiling words to code ultimately. And there's different points of how you do it.
Yeah. So that all makes sense. And so I think then that it gives me confidence that the feelings I have about not really understanding what's going on are not bad. Like, it's not a sign of failure. It's, I'm not one of the people who's like pushing the frontier of like what AI coding is. I'm more of, I would say, probably the late majority on this, where I'm going to show up when the tools have solidified. And to me, that's when they really become useful for work. And because I'm not somebody whose my job isn't building AI tooling, using them before they're ready for work is tinkering as far as I'm concerned. And I don't have time to tinker. I got to get stuff out the door. Right. So I'll use it when it works and when there's documentation and I can like be confident. And I feel like we're starting to approach that now. And I think that's the part that's exciting to me, is that we're seeing paradigms emerge, like the Copilot CLI. Now that's another tool that feels similar to other tools where people are kind of converging on a way to approach these things. And the fact that you launched an SDK, which I'd love to talk about, also makes me start to feel like, okay, this is starting to feel like a thing you can actually like use. It's not a thing where you need like that one person who's terminally online, who's like super plugged into exactly what's going on and like has figured out how to get a little speaker to play Andre Karpathy's tweets right into his ear whenever they come out. Instead, you can start to look at him as like, all right, I could just read the docs on this and use it, and I don't need all the context of everything else that's happening out in the world. So let's dig in a little bit into what that means, because to me, this is where it gets really exciting. Like, now we can build. We're not exploring anymore. We're building. What does the SDK enable me to do practically? So like I could have done it in the CLI, but I'm going to use the SDK instead. Why would I reach for it? Like, what's a use case that makes that work?
The SDK means that you have an AI platform that you can integrate into anything. And you don't have to add any extra tools to do that. And so when I say an AI platform, I mean, if you didn't have it, if it didn't exist, if you wanted to make, for example, an app that generated YouTube chapters for a video, like for this one, for example, typically you would need to have some tool to get transcripts from a video. You take that transcript and then you put it through some kind of like summarizing thing and generate chapters from there. And so you need a layer that pulls the video. You need a layer that does the audio processing, that does all of that. With the SDK, you can build that so much easier because it does a lot of that AI work under the hood. And that example is actually one that one of my coworkers did, where he said, I want to be able to just get YouTube chapters quickly. Yeah. And so he built his own CLI tool with the SDK, where he runs like some command you placed in a YouTube video, and it just spits out the YouTube chapters, and that's it. And it's done in seconds. And I had mentioned, for example, I made a cute buttons AI agent thing with the SDK. That it's just a kind of a nice thing that works. Another example that I made last week that was really exciting for me, because I kind of like one shot it, asked an agent to build it. It wasn't perfect, but it got a lot of the base parts there. Was I wanted to make a color palette organizer. I have a bunch of notes with hex codes in it where it's just like, okay, this is a color palette that's mostly purple and this and that. And it's just there has to be a better way to organize colors that you might want to use for an app. So that was the app that I wanted to build. When I added the SDK to it, I just said AI mode to see what would happen. And so I was able to, for example, based on this color palette, generate tags for it. And so it'd say like warm, cute, summery, or something like that. Or based on this image, pull out all of the hex codes from it, also name the image, and also categorize it into folders. And it automatically can do all of that AI with the SDK because it's a method that you call.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a very fundamentals question on this.
Sure.
Because what you're describing is very cool. What is that app? Is that a JavaScript app? Is it a bash script? Is it a website? What are you building that you're then plugging the SDK into?
So I mentioned one was a CLI app. The color palette one, that was an Electron app. I wanted it to be just like a local desktop app that could save colors. We actually saw some interesting submissions. We had like a little mini hackathon over the weekend on Reddit to see what people would build. And it was fascinating, some of the things that people built with it, because people are way more creative than the people who are actually working on a tool. There was one person where they built an agent that plays Stardew Valley. And so what they did was they built a tool where they said hey, cut all the weeds on the farm. And then the character was running around Stardew Valley cutting all the weeds because it used the SDK to do that. Yeah.
Cool. So
cool.
let me think about this a little bit, because I just have kind of
I can spew more examples at you too.
Well, and I want to see if I can maybe reason through if I was going to build a thing. So let's say I want an app that I could send a Discord message to, I could, at the bot. So I know how to build a Discord bot. It runs in a serverless container or a render container, something like that. And so I would build a serverless function. And I could say okay, what I want this bot to do is sort of interpret the intent of this. And then it can send information to one of three places. And maybe what I want is once it get, if let's say I say, I want you to post this photo to my website. And when it goes to the website, I could also have something on my website that says, you just got a new photo. I could put the SDK on my website, which is, let's say a site hosted on Netlify. It's an Astro site. I've got the ability to put some API endpoints in there. So maybe the photo comes into the API endpoint, and I could say, all right, Copilot SDK, look at this image and tell me what's in it. Take a best guess at some alt text, take a best guess at some tags, and then store that in the database as well.
Yes.
So I could tell it to do that, and I wouldn't have to build out all of the specifics of that script. I could just kind of say all right, SDK, here's what I want you to do. And it's going to, I assume I have to do a lot of guidance once that gets in there, but
things, but yes, you can build that.
Okay.
And that was actually one of the entries where someone built themselves a custom Discord bot where they could message themselves anywhere and get responses from the bot. That's cool.
I'm being told to ask you about the Rust app, and I'm hoping this isn't a trap.
It is a trap. I tried to one-shot a Rust app last week, and let's just say it was my fault more than any other thing. I was not set up to run Rust very well on this machine.
In my experience, whenever I try to write Rust, it is always my fault, and it never comes out the way.
Exactly. That was not my finest moment. I was just yeah, sure, let's see it do it. I was not prepared. So that is what the Rust app is.
So I'm excited about this because I think the thing that I have been inherently distrustful of with a lot of the AI stuff is that everything that I've been seeing is sort of this promise. Look at this cool thing that we made. It's this fleet of agents. It's this totally autonomous system. It's this magic thing. And you can show me how you built it. And either you see a demo where somebody's pulling a turkey out of the oven that's fully baked, and you're okay, but what happened there? There's a lot that you didn't show me between this idea and this working app. Or they try to do it live and it's really janky and does not work. And so what I'm excited about is that it feels like we're starting to approach a world where what gets demoed is what you can build. And I think a lot of my inherent disillusionment with the AI tools was right out of the gate people would be like, look at this cool thing. And so I would open up the tool and I would say, do the thing that I saw in the demo. And it would absolutely fail.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so what's different? Like, did I break it? And I was like, I typed the same prompt they did. Why didn't it work? And so then it was like this kind of immediate, like, oh, I don't think they're being honest. Right. And now it's feeling more and more like when people show a demo that it's built on tools where like there are reproducible outcomes. Like, yes, there's non-determinism in it. You're not going to get exactly the same answer, but it's at least going to respond in like the right shape of JSON to go into the database, or like it's at least not going to immediately delete all of your code because it's like, the best way to make tests pass is not to have tests.
Exactly.
Like, hey, I get it. I feel that too, bot, but I'm starting to feel like at least this isn't quite so much of like a secret club.
It's not like hand wavy as much anymore.
Yeah.
It feels like we're approaching a point where things are real. Not that things weren't real before, but like you're pulling a whole turkey out of the oven or it fails. Like that was so common. It feels like we're approaching things where things are a bit more stable. There's a bit more documentation and the real use cases make more sense. And there's some things where you just don't have to do everything completely manually anymore. And there's some things where you can do things manually. If you get some joy out of it, you can just do things a little bit faster. I think like we're hitting the point where it's less learn this completely new way of thinking. And it's more, this tool can enhance what you're already doing.
And that's where I get excited. Like there's the AI that existed before that was like image recognition. There was a whole bunch of stuff that computer vision, the speech to text, text to speech, like all these things that sort of existed before the current wave of like AI hype that were such fascinating things to incorporate into projects. You'd see like what the TensorFlow project was doing, and you would see what was coming out of these labs that were kind of playing with the different machine learning stuff. And it was like, man, you can do some really cool stuff it's truly not possible without these tools. And now they've all sort of been put under the AI umbrella, which I think has made some people dig their heels in and say never. And it's like, I don't know though. Like, I really like the idea of being able to have a website where you can wave to it and it responds. And that's something that existed before LLMs. That's TensorFlow. That's, image recognition and stuff. I really like that you can auto moderate images so that the worst of the worst stuff just never goes to a human's eyeballs. That's good. That's a good thing.
It's a good use case.
Not getting into the ethical side of anything. I think it's important to recognize that like these are tools that were useful before the hype. They are even more useful in certain ways now. Not magic, not miracles, just tools. And if we approach them that way and we use the things that are really, it's just so nice to be able to think about it like work and not like, am I in a cult?
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's real. I think that accessibility angle is cool too, because like, for example, serverless functions, we've used those. We've talked about those. A lot of the tech behind it existed for a very long time, but it was only accessible to enterprises or only accessible to really big companies or people who put in a lot of the infrastructure work to make it work. And now it's a function where you put a file somewhere.
Yes.
It's great. I feel like this is what we're approaching now with a lot of AI tools is now it's accessible where you could do all of this stuff with TensorFlow and you could build like Markov chains to predict a next word and things like that. Now you have more tools to build more personalized things to what you want more easily because it's so accessible.
Right. Yes, that is exactly how I feel about it. I am very excited. I'm also pumped to see how this actually works. For folks who are new here, this is a live recording. We do 2 shows in one. So the first part is what we call the Web Dev Podcast. It's available on all of your favorite podcatchers. The idea is conversations just like this one, where we talk about what's coming, trends, how to think about it, how to adopt it into our workflows, how it's going to affect us for real. And the second part is called Learn with Jason. It's pair programming. We are going to share a screen. We're going to actually build something. I think this is a good point for us to maybe end the Web Dev Podcast, because this has been a fascinating conversation. Do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up here?
I'm excited to get building. I think really right now, everything is early. the things that you build now are going to be amongst the first things. You're not just cutting edge, you're bleeding edge. But that's also exciting because every piece of feedback that you have is sent directly to the team because they want to improve things now. Like, now is the time to build. And so not just to be like, I'm shilling GitHub, it's great, but it's more, if you use the Copilot SDK now, for example, and build something, and you don't like a certain workflow, you don't like certain pieces of documentation, you don't like anything, because it's so new, everyone wants to improve it now, and you can really give feedback now that makes it more what you want to see now more than ever because it's fresh. And I think it's the same way with a lot of AI tools, but now is a great time to build and give feedback because you'll be very listened to.
100%. Okay. Cassidy, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I am so excited to actually pick this up and build something with you. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Make sure that you are, we're on all the spots. If you want to get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those things, we're there. Thank you again. And we will catch you on the next one.